Can I make an advert for a podcast which follows the principles of international advertising firms and gets the same level of success? My aim is simple: to increase my monthly podcast listens by 50% with adverts. Can I do it? We're finding out. Little did I know that when I first started looking into podcast advertising, that I'd spent so much time reading about this one chap called Ogilvy who lived before podcasts. But if you followed the last episode, you'll know why and all about him and what I discovered. And today, I'm going to be putting what I learned into practice and make this advert with the goal of increasing my podcast listenership, as I say, by 50%. It is, of course, an ambitious target, but in fact, over the last 30 days, my podcast listens went up 39% organically. So I want to beat that. I want to see these ads actually working. And that is Ogilvy's first tip, in fact: set a clear target. So that bit is done. We can also tick off the customer research as well. And while I've not done any formal market research, as Ogilvy says you should, I think I've got a good idea of who I'm trying to reach. It's people who want to know what actually works in podcasting. But there's other people doing that, right? Kind of drifts off the tongue and you kind of forget it when I say that. So what I really need to do, and I think we do this with all our shows, is to be more specific by targeting a specific type of person. And I think that person is about to quit their podcast. I think this is who my advert needs to reach out to. One of my first episodes, in fact, was about pod fade, because it's something I've experienced quite a few times. And most podcasters give up, as I'm sure you know, within about 8 to 10 episodes, because what they tried didn't deliver on what they actually hoped for. So let's call this imaginary person, our avatar in this case, Mary, or it could be Mark, or it could be Phil. And I defined Mary in the last show, as Ogilvy said we had to try and do. So let's try and picture her just again quickly. So she's a podcast fan. You imagine her sitting there at the moment. She's a podcast fan. She loves podcasts and listens to them all the time. And she sees other people having success. And these podcasts sound really easy to make and they sound fantastic. And she's really engaged with them. And she's been making a podcast. And it's been running for about 8 to 10 episodes. And she's now finding that it just doesn't seem to be working in her eyes. And she can't understand why when all these other people seem to have success. And she just wants someone to stop making all these claims about what works or what is the amazing secret to podcasting, and instead to tell her in an unbiased way, based on real world evidence, what techniques actually produce results, which of course is the whole point of my show. So how do I reach her? How do I inspire her? As I said last week, I need her to physically pick up her arm and get her hand to select a podcast app on her phone and then click subscribe. It's a few steps. And all I have to do that are 5 to 10 words and an image. So let's work on these in two parts. The first bit being the words. And Ogilvy says we need to start with this. To come up with our words, we need to think about our big idea. So what are our shows about? What is my show about? How can I condense it down into a catchy sentence? So for me, for my show, I wrote down this: find out what actually works. That's the kind of sums it up. But it is pretty cliched. As I say, everyone kind of says that already. So I need to be a bit different. And that's another rule that Ogilvy says, and just about everyone else says as well. You need to be different to stand out now. Seth got him with his purple cow reference. Maybe this then is the big idea. You don't have to pod fade. There are techniques out there which can save your podcast and you from giving up, and you can turn it around. Now that feels to me more like it. I don't know for you whether that resonated more, but it is a bit long, right? I need a statement that will grab people. But what is the single simple message that I'm trying to put across then? Let's try some bullet points. This is what I wrote down. You don't have to pod fade. That there are podcast techniques that work out there, and this show finds the ones that do. Your show can succeed if you do what others do. And number 4, your show can succeed if you use techniques that actually work. I think those points sum up the big idea. And remember, this isn't the final wording yet. This is about us trying to go, what is all our work, all our hours of work into our podcast condensed into a sentence? The things with those so far is I don't think any of them, certainly when I wrote them down, didn't inspire me to make me want to go, right, I must go and click subscribe on that. So what else do we need to do? They're too long-winded and, frankly, in my mind, too cliched. Now then, Ogilvy says don't complicate it as well. Mary needs to get our message, this message we're going to come up with, instantly. Decisions, Ogilvy says, happen subconsciously, not always rationally, but emotionally. So we have to get Mary to make her decision to click subscribe based on an emotional decision rather than a logical one. And the more I can connect with Mary, the more chance I'm going to have of connecting with that emotional side of her. Now, we all know those sort of adverts which feel like they are written for us. And that's exactly what I got to do here. If you think about it, think of an example like an advert which begins with something like this. When you take your children to school, do you? Now, if you have children and you take them to school, that's going to feel like that was written for you. It's not going to feel like it if you're a teenager who's never even thought of children before. So I've got to do something that is going to instantly resonate emotionally with Mary to get her to pick up her phone and to click subscribe. So let's try a few more phrases that might do this. Number one, I know you were thinking about quitting your podcast, but don't. That to me actually jumps off the page as speaking directly to me. I don't know whether it grabbed you. It did quite a few people on social media when I shared this with people. It's certainly more striking, and Ogilvy says we must give it personality. So maybe something simpler, like I was talking about in the last episode, don't quit, might be the first line. Or it's time to cut the BS. What podcast techniques actually work? But that feels kind of spammy and might not go down well with the ad approvers. Is that actually going to get Mary to subscribe? By the way, just a reminder, if you're not already subscribed to this show, then if you like what I'm doing and you'd like to follow all the research that I'm looking into, then feel free to click like or add a comment and click the subscribe button and notification button on the place you're listening or following this right now. And if you get a chance, a review on iTunes would be fantastic too, as it helps to get the word out and get more people involved in the research that I'm doing here on what actually makes a hit show. And it's also really useful to me to know what you like and what you don't like about this, so I can make this as valuable as possible for you. Okay, let's get straight back to the point. So let's try this for personality then. Don't quit your podcast. There are answers out there. Subscribe. Bit more positive, maybe. I know your podcast can do better than it is. The only thing is perhaps these imply that I have all the answers, which I don't, and I would never claim to in my show or my branding. I'm a researcher looking for the truth. I'm not some guru who claims I can perform miracles for you if you pay me $2,000 for my course. Now, one final factor I need to add into all this is I've learned talking to podcasters like Matt Nappo from MindDog TV that you need to think about what the person is doing when they see the advert. Now, this advert is going to be on a Facebook advert. So they're not sitting down listening to podcasts. At the moment, they're scrolling through, probably looking very casually at different stories, and my advert's going to pop up in their feed. They may well only have a few minutes right now, so they may well not be able to listen to my podcast. So my main priority here, I think, for a Facebook advert is to get them to subscribe in the hope that they then listen to the show a bit later on, because I think asking them to go from a casual browsing to sitting down for 10, 20 minutes is just not going to work. So let's try and bring this all to a conclusion here. I've basically came up with 4 ideas that I then put out on social media to ask people what they thought. And I'll run through these 4 and see which you think resonates with you. So number 1, don't quit your podcast. There are answers out there. Subscribe. Number 2, I know you were thinking about quitting your podcast, but don't. Number 3, cut the asterisk, what really works in podcasting. And number 4, don't give up. What really works in podcasting? So I put this out there on social media, and thanks for all the responses on there, especially to these podcasts. What are you going to do with that? Anyway, whatever podcast. It goes down in the PM, and invest in yourself. Thank you very much to all of you for commenting on that, and for all the suggestions as well that people sent me directly. The winner, so to speak, will be revealed next week when I release the advert. There is one other bit that we still need to consider with wording, and this is something that Ogilvy didn't have to account for being pre-podcast. And it's the extra wording that Facebook gives you to promote the post itself. Now, as we found last time, Gimlet and Wondery certainly didn't ignore this. So let's give you 2 examples from Gimlet. They said this promoting their podcast, How to Save a Planet, and I'll put a link in the show notes to this. What can offshore wind bring besides energy? Learn how a small town used the offshore wind industry to bring back tax revenue and jobs to a once coal-dependent community. And this one for the Resistance podcast, I found this much more engaging, in fact. After a summer protest, how can we make sure this time really is different? Hear stories from the front lines of the movement for Black Lives, told by the generation fighting for change. Follow and listen to #Resistance Podcast for free on Spotify. As I say, I'll add those links on the show notes so you can see those ads. So let's try and emulate that wording here. So this is what I came up with. Most podcasters quit before they find success. A former journalist investigates the claims around podcasting and puts them to the test in the hunt for the secret of how to make a hit show. Follow along with the real-time research. Click subscribe now, listen later. And I think that's done for the wording. There is finally one other bit though, and that's the image, because Ogilvy says that 80% of an advert has to be an image. So I'm going to take two approaches here for my A/B test. The first one will be the one that a lot of podcasters use, including myself in the past, and it seems that Gimlet have used this as well. So this is a podcast logo, quite simply the logo with that long wording in the main post. Very little else. And then B, Ogilvy's suggested approach, with an image that is, as he said, either instantly eye-catching, clear, attractive, or funny. So it has got to grab your attention whatever happens. And attractive like attractive people he was talking about. But that's not something, as I said last time, that I can use. So I've gone for the funny approach. And I'm no creative director. So I borrowed an idea from the Drum website. Link, of course, in the show notes again on that one. And then I did the following. I went to the shop and I bought a pineapple, and then I got my headphones out and I put those on the pineapple's head. I added a pair of Ray-Bans onto its face, put a microphone in front of it, and cut out a mouth out of it like a pumpkin too. And then I set it up on a photography stand, which you'll have seen on my social media if you're following that. Hit Podcast 2020, by the way, at Hit Podcast 2020 on Instagram and Twitter. I added some lighting to the pineapple and then used my phone to take some photos. And then with a bit of graphic software, I then added the wording to the image and came up with some final ads. And my ad basically ready to run. So I have a pineapple podcaster and the words ready, and we are ready to click go. There are a few final bits which I'll cover actually in the next podcast episode because I've covered so much stuff this time. But come next week, I'll be clicking start on this ad. I've got to be honest, at this point, I don't think either of these ads is even going to work very well. So why am I doing this? Because there's a lot of advice out there saying try Facebook ads. And as with everything else I'm trying here, I want to put my own assumptions aside and let the data decide. So let's see what happens. I'll update my social media feeds next week as I start the campaign, and I'll show off the adverts and keep you up to date on at Hit Podcast 2020. That's at Hit Podcast 2020 on Twitter and Instagram. And I'll be updating you with all the real-time processes and progress and all the behind-the-scenes steps as well on this very podcast next week. All the stuff I can't get in social media, I will include in here. If you would like to follow my research, as I say, then please click like or add a comment. In fact, a review on iTunes, as I say, would transform this podcast and get more people involved in the research too, including yourself. And don't forget to click subscribe as well if you haven't already, to stay up to date as we try to find out what really works in podcasting and what really are the techniques that will allow you and me to make a hit podcast. I will speak to you with the updates very, very soon.